So thank you for taking a look at the screencasts. I saw many of your questions, at least if you looked at the screencast before about 1:30 today, and I will try to answer those questions as we go through the topic today. If I do not, please chime in at some point that seems appropriate or at the end of class, because I definitely want to address your questions, and there really were some quite a number of great ones. Okay, so hopefully after the two screencasts, you are all convinced that secondary sources are usually the place to start your research. Actually, that was one of the questions. Should we start in secondary sources? Is that efficient? And much of the time, I think the answer is yes. Can anybody remember some of the rationale for that? Why I think the answer is yes?
Yeah, the background, context for what we're looking for, research, primary sources.
Background and context. And as we will see with our issue, our initial issue spotting, while we got a good start, there are some aspects of that issue that we probably, I think, based on your answers last time, we need to learn a little bit more about. Anybody else? Okay, well, we shall discuss as we go forward. One thing about today's class, we will be tight on time, and it's highly likely we will not finish the last workshop. Fear not, I have us covered. We'll finish it up next time as necessary. So in case you're wondering, I already have it planned. Okay, so let's dive in. So one of the aspects covered in the screencast, and actually at least one of the questions, had to do with research logs and how to go about doing one. The answer, unfortunately, as in with most log questions, it depends, but the answer is actually it depends on your preferences. Everybody organizes their thoughts, their research, each particular issue slightly differently. So what I have on the course website, just want to make sure I'm going to click on the right link here, under the handouts link, are a couple of examples and then a description from the Sloan legal research text, which some of you may have used in your legal writing class and may or may not still have, but you can take a look at the more in-depth description there. But just to briefly look at a couple of the examples here, I went to sample 2 just because this makes more sense to me personally. It doesn't make it better, it doesn't make it right, it just means this is more how I think and organize. So it gives you a list of what you want to keep track of in terms of the sources, again, depending on what those sources are, so title, call number if it's a book, and so forth. But what I really like about this, and what I would transfer, is I like the fact that it makes me write down what the facts are, the client, my preliminary analysis, our key terms that we talked about. So if you hadn't already done some issue spotting, this might prompt you to remind you to do that ahead of time. The legal concepts of part of that issue spotting, and then this chart here, which I would probably transfer over and just do in a spreadsheet rather than try to fit it in there, just to give me the basic, get me to write down the basic information about the particular source. Another sample, this isn't by all means an exhaustive representation of the universe of possibilities, but another way to do it, a slightly larger chart where you keep track of your search terms and then the different sources checked within those search terms. And obviously you can mix and match, develop your own, whatever makes sense to you. But here are a couple to think about. The other thing we will talk about that Sloan research text mentions is that within the research services, there are folders. So taking a look here at Westlaw, you can store your information in folders. So that is something that I actually do quite a lot with. So I might do this for a particular client or a particular matter, whether I label it the issue, so maybe HMO might be my folder, and then I'd dump everything I find in Westlaw that I think worthwhile in HMO. Westlaw is pretty good about keeping track or holding on to those documents that you put in, and as we mentioned last time, and for those of you who are interested in doing the extra credit on cost analysis and efficiency, you'll see that folders is one way to help save costs on both Lexis and Westlaw. And it works pretty much the same on Lexis with the folders. So let's go back here to course website. Okay. So, anybody here a Homeland fan or sort of Game of Thrones? Yeah, no, a little bit. So, you know, on Homeland, Mandy Patinkin says, previously on our show, I can't do his voice, so previously in our class, we were looking at Google, and we had come up with our issue spotting, the terms up there, HMO liability for denial of coverage. So again, just as a previously refresher, our client was born with a heart defect. She wanted to go to a cardiologist, but she gets her health insurance through her employer, like many of us do, and that health insurance, which happens to be an HMO, Health Maintenance Organization, told her, nah, cardiologist too expensive. You seem fine. We're not going to pay for it. And sadly, 6 months later, she had a heart attack. And so she now wants to say, hey, wait a minute. They should have covered me. I want to sue them. I've lost a lot of work. I've spent a lot of money. I want to sue them. And so in the course of our issue spotting, we came up with these terms. I put that spreadsheet that we worked on with the issue spotting, should anybody be interested, again here in the handouts portion of the website. So as we talked about, Google. We're going to go there, right? It's easy. Great place to start. You just don't want to stop there. We talked a lot about, and we did an exercise on how to think about whether a website we're looking at is reliable, doesn't have a bias, or if it does, at least we know about the bias. And we talked about that tree and how the fact checkers took a look at the About website, the About portion of any given website, and then did some lateral analysis and did some Googling of that particular organization to see who are they, who's sponsoring them, what viewpoint might they have that I need to know about. So back here on our Google search, we took a look at a couple of the sites. We talked a little bit about law firm sites. Okay to get started, but remember law firm websites typically are trying to get clients. So great to give you some background, but don't trust that site to give you the law. That's what you're being hired to figure out. Another site here we took a look at from PubMed, from the National Library of Medicine, and we were talking about one of the themes of the class is bibliographic awareness. How does the resource work? How up to date it is? And somebody in class noticed, well, this one's a little bit out of date. Well, depending on how you judge it, maybe a lot out of date. And that is absolutely true. And the point of bibliographic awareness is so that what it suggests you are aware. It's not to say don't look at it. It's very possible that this site or other sites that are on the older side have very useful information. You just want to make sure that you know, oh, look, this is back from 2005. That's 13 years old now. I better check any of my resources, check any of the laws, check any of the analysis to see if it is still valid. Just as a quick story as to why that's really true, way back while dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was practicing law for a very short period of time, I had an assignment where I had to do some research on promissory notes. Well, it turns out the controlling case for this particular research I had to do was from the 1880s. I kid you not. That. The law got decided in 1880 something, and that was that. And I was really, can I cite to a case from 1880? And yeah, I needed to cite to a case from 1880. Now, that's an extreme example, but again, it depends on what the law is. Okay, so taking a look at our Google site, so National Library of Medicine, we feel pretty good about. And we know it's 2005, so we know we've got to update. So now it's time to learn from our Google search. So we took a look at that law firm site last time. Here, very first sentence, abstract. The Federal Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, ERISA, supersedes state laws as they relate to employer-based health care plans. Thus, cases brought under ERISA's care are heard in federal courts. So we just learned a ton there from that very first sentence. This sounds pretty relevant in terms of employer-based health plans. We learned that this ERISA, which we kind of saw a reference to in the other site, could be really important. And now we've learned that ERISA supersedes state laws, so we may wind up having to be in federal court. We don't know yet. You can't certainly make a conclusion like that from a first sentence of a 2005 article, but we've learned, again, from secondary sources, some of the context of perhaps another issue. We have to learn about ERISA. And so we can read on, and it talks about how they're examining 10 states. And I know I'm not giving you the opportunity to read through this in depth, which of course you want to do since it seems pretty relevant. But so it talks about the history of the state laws, and then it talks about health plan liability. Pretty relevant for our client, right? That's what we're talking about, HMO liable. So 2 types of liability, contract and tort. So here they're giving us possible theories. They're pretty basic at the moment. That's not going to get us very far, but it's a start. So it explains a little what contracts are. We don't need to worry about that. We've been to law school. And it talks about what torts are. Talks about malpractice cases referring to holding doctors responsible. But then it goes on to talk about managed care entities. What on earth are managed care entities? Yep. Pardon me? Actually, an HMO is a type of managed care entity. So if you didn't already know that, what would you do? Totally, Google it. The more difficult part is to think to yourself, what on earth are managed care? I might want to know that. Part of being a good researcher and frankly a good lawyer is asking yourself questions and realizing what you need to know more about. So what are these managed care entities? So you might want to Google, and I'm going to shortcut that process just a little bit and come up with, Wikipedia. I know you've all been told, never use Wikipedia. And the real way to phrase that, or the better way to phrase that, is never cite to Wikipedia. Totally fine to go look at Wikipedia. Wikipedia has some really useful stuff. And Wikipedia can at least help if I don't know what managed care is. I can read a little about it, and sure enough, here's just a list of types, and HMO is right on top. There's also an IPA and a PPO and all sorts of alphabet soup type organizations. So again, remember to ask yourself questions. Okay, so going back, we've already learned a whole lot. And then after talking about health plan liability and talking about managed care, it gives us some background on ERISA. It talks about Congress's intent. Okay, so unfortunately, as I said, I can't give you the time to read through this whole article, but you hopefully get a sense of what you can look through a single Google result. And we've already learned, we've got a whole other research project ahead of us on to figure out what this ERISA is, does it apply to us, why do we care? Okay, and I have also hopefully now convinced everybody that secondary source, when you really don't know where you are good places to go to. So we need a little bit more background on HMO liability, denial of coverage, where, if at all, ERISA fits in. So where do you think we should go next?
Treatise.
Oh, possible. We'll get there.
Okay.
Where else? Law review, always a good spot. I know some of you work with the law review. We'll do that next class. How about a more basic resource? Encyclopedia. So in terms of where to start, a few of you are a little confused on the screencast question in terms of, do I always start in encyclopedias? And unfortunately, in legal research, there's pretty much not an always anything, except maybe always, well, I can't even say that, always go beyond Google. Once in a while, Google's just going to be fine, but it's once in a while. Encyclopedias are going to be a whole lot less in-depth. They're going to be a lot quicker, briefer. So sometimes they're a good place to go just to get some basic background. Treatises are going to be much more in-depth. So you may want to do treatises a little bit further down the line when you know a little bit more. Do I need to find an ERISA treatise? We don't even know that ERISA applies yet. But you may want to find an ERISA treatise. But let's see if we can find out more about our issue, our question about ERISA, and any other questions that we haven't thought of quite yet. So what we are going to do is to dive in to an exercise on encyclopedias. So I am going to divide you all up. There are a couple of people who aren't here, so my math may be a little off. I'm also going to practice on names, so bear with me, it's only class 2. Okay, so Caitlin, Jackie, Sybil, and Tessa, you're group 1, and you're going to look at ALR. Don't go there yet, I'm going to show everybody how to get where you need to go. Okay, so Marianne, Katrina, and Sean, you're group 2, and you will be looking in AmJur, American Jurisprudence. Okay, am I good on names so far? Excellent. Okay, group number 3, Alicia, Ilana or Ilana? Ilana, Alicia, Ilana, and Julia? Yes, okay. You are group 3, right? 3. And you will be CJS, Corpus Juris Secundum. And again, I'm going to show you all how to get where you need to go. Okay, group number 4, Amy, Alex, and Ben? Ben or Benjamin? Ben, okay. You are group 4, and you are proof of facts. And by the way, so I don't forget to tell you, the CJS, group 3, and group 4, proof of facts, you must go to Westlaw. I'll show you how to get to where you need to go. Oh, and it looks like we've got a group of 2. All right, like I said, my math on the fly isn't the best. Matt or Matthew? Matt is shorter. That's you. You gave me the choice. Okay, Matt and James, you're going to do New York jurisprudence. Okay, so how do we get to all these wondrous sources? And this is going to be on Lexis or Westlaw. With a couple of groups I already mentioned, you need to go to Westlaw, so let's start there. And Westlaw, let's go back to the home page. So, a couple of you asked in the screencast, how do I get into secondary sources? Best way to search? I would say on Westlaw, you can either just search straight away in the bar up here. I've noticed I have all states and federal. We'll talk about limiting to state in a little while. Or if you just want to look at secondary sources, go to secondary sources. I typically wouldn't narrow further at this point, but you can if you know, for instance, you want to search ALR, which is an unusual, typically if you're just researching an issue, you're not going to know if you want ALR or you don't want ALR. But if you do, for whatever reason, want to limit, obviously the limits are here, but since we're trying to establish best practices and good habits, from here I might throw in search terms, and what I'm going to do is throw in a totally different issue that actually I think you probably talked about in first year. So drunk driving. Do you remember talking about drunk driving in any classes in first year? Doesn't really matter. This is more of a, just to show you how this works. And so from here, again, you can limit to your particular resource. So ALR is under publication type. If we scroll down, we can also see specific publication names. You'll see American jurisprudence. Depending on what terms you search, you may or may not find CJS, proof of facts, or New York jurisprudence in this list. If you don't, fear not. So here in my example, you do see New York jur, but I don't think we saw CJS or proof of facts. You can always, on Westlaw, I prefer to go to the home page, but you probably don't even have to, type in the title. So proof of facts, and sure enough, actually the full name is American jurisprudence, proof of facts. So group number 4, there you go. Group number 3, that'll work for CJS. Take the CJS up there. Group number 5, if you don't see New York jurisprudence, you can type in New York jurisprudence if you are choosing Westlaw. Other than the two groups, the other groups can choose their either Lexis or Westlaw. If you are choosing Lexis, because I know there's some Lexis users in the class, it works pretty much the same way. From a narrow to secondary materials, do your search, or you can narrow further what you see here. And again, you can filter on the left the same way we do when we're shopping on Amazon. And you see the list of sources. Okay. Make sure I have told you everything I need to tell you. So what I am going to ask you to do is this. You may work together or individually. I want you to find the best section or sections, there may be more than one, for our client. And I also want you to look at your source and see if you find any other research features that look like they may be fun or interesting. I will ask one, however, you could, as I said, you can work individually or together. I'm going to ask one person from each group to come up front and show us what you have found. That person's going to have the easy job because all she or he will have to do is type. The rest of the group is going to have to tell the person what to type. So it might be, depending on how you like to do things, it won't be so terrible to be up here up front. And I'll help out too. Okay, the rest of the group, as I said, is going to help out. So what are some of the terms we're going to search? Yes?
We're doing drunk driving or the HMO?
No, we're doing our HMO. The drunk driving was just for me to show you how to find stuff. No, we want to find stuff for our clients. Okay, so what are some of the search terms we're going to be using? Or have already started to use? Anything else? Possibly. We don't know if that applies yet, but you want to find out. What was the other part of our issue? I'm not saying to use all those terms or not to use all those terms. Part of the point of issue spotting is to give you some possibilities to try, because the first one probably will not be the best. Your first search will probably not be the best search. The other thing I want to warn you before you really dive in and get started is that in real life, a lot of times when you look at a source, you're not going to find anything good. So 2 of the groups will not find anything particularly good. 3 of the groups should find something fairly good. And I'm not telling you which, obviously. So go ahead. I don't know if you'll need the full 10 minutes, but I'll give you 10 minutes. And I'll walk around, and if you've got any questions, comments, ambitions, Just going to pause our recording because we don't need to. And the rest of you have to help her out since. Okay, so watch your step. That's the only caveat. I don't know if you want a mouse or a touchpad.
I'll go mouse. I haven't used
Westlaw?
Yes,
You
we
look
use
like you're on
Westlaw.
Westlaw. Okay, so let's all take a look and see what we can do with ALR. So, what's Tessa doing here?
She's going to search HMO liability for denial of coverage. Oh, doesn't matter.
Sorry.
Click secondary sources.
So are we searching just all of secondary sources?
No, ALRs only.
Okay, so you're going straight. Again, from a normal strategy standpoint, better to search all secondary sources because you don't know if there's something good in ALR or not. Hopefully there is. So
Now she's typing HMO liability for denial of coverage.
Did it not? I don't think it went to the ARs. I don't think it ever loaded.
okay, so you can filter it on the other end, which is fine. Apply filters. That's the part I always forget to do.
Yeah, I didn't do that. This one's pretty on point.
Okay. I'm going to stay there a while, but scroll. Did you find any good research resources other than the article itself?
The outline is helpful because you can click and go to particular topics.
Outline's always good for navigation. Anything else?
Breaks down cases by circuit, so if you're looking for a particular jurisdiction, it can help you that way too.
Ooh, so ALR points you directly to particular circuits and states.
Also, the index has a lot of terms.
And index terms. Anything else? Okay. Excellent. So let's take a little bit closer look at this ALR article. Thank you much. Tessa, watch your step. You're expert driving. So, liability of third-party healthcare payor. What on earth is a third-party healthcare payor? I heard an answer. The insurance company. Don't get thrown off by funky legalese. Turns out that's the insurance company. I'm actually going to go back to see. Sometimes, if I can find it. It's not here now. Oh, here we go. So here's one, and depends, I've probably searched this too much, so now Westlaw jumps it up to the top. But sometimes this title comes up first. Liability of health maintenance organizations for negligence of member physicians. Is that what we want? I see some heads. No, why? You're absolutely right.
It's like med mal, vicarious liability. Let's just say you go to the doctor and they screw up. You sue your HMO for sending you to that doctor or now.
Exactly. This talks about member physicians. So we didn't get to a physician for that physician to mess up. So think through what all this means. And again, if you don't know what it means, Google and Wikipedia are one place to go. So back here on our ALR article, a couple of things I want to point out. If Westlaw would be kind enough to take us there. So again, read through. So you'll notice I've actually highlighted a little bit. So ordinarily, a patient alleging injury brings negligent suit against practitioner. Emerging system of managed care. Again, we get that managed health care. Again, we get that terminology where the third-party payor, part of its utilization review, law is made up of words, or as I like to say, law is words. Not very grammatical, but hopefully meaningful. Law is words. So the key to finding the law is finding the right words. And half the battle in doing research is figuring out what the terminology is. So we figured out HMO. Some of us didn't know what HMO meant initially, which is fine. We talked about, well, liability we all know about. We talked about denial of care. We're learning about managed care. It could be maybe HMO isn't the way it's referred to in whatever resources we need to look at. It could be, maybe it's managed care, or maybe it's managed health care. What is this utilization review all about? You want to read on and see if we can get a sense. And cost saving strategy. So here, Alex, it's talking about the expressed reason in our hypothetical of what the HMO said. So hopefully this will help us research and address that. Again, not to say that you may not be right, that the real reason isn't pre-existing condition, but at least this is going to help us address that. Okay, refuses to authorize a particular treatment and where the patient alleges that this decision caused them harm. This is right on point, right? So patient may bring action. And again, we see here applying both tort and contract principles. So it's starting to give us some legal theories. We saw that in the other article, and obviously we need to get a whole lot more specific than just torts and contracts, but it's a start. And as Tessa pointed out, we have this lovely outline to help us navigate within the article. As well as the different jurisdictions. That's the nice thing. If you do find an ALR, it's wonderful. The point with ALRs, you're not going to find an ALR on everything. ALR is more in-depth than an encyclopedia, but you're not going to find it on everything. So if you do find one, though, it's done half your research for you. So here's our introduction, and this annotation includes cases where the underlying state negligence claim was preempted by federal law, particularly sections of the employee retirement. So it looks like ERISA may preempt us under state law. And again, we talked about managed care. So again, the importance of terminology. So you see here, number of actions brought by state court have been preempted. We already talked about that. It contains a preemption clause which provides that ERISA supersedes any and all state laws as they may now or hereafter relate to employee benefit plans. And as stated in your screencast, one of the main reasons we looked at secondary sources is for context and explanation, which this ALR article, I think, is providing wonderfully well. It also gives us references to the all-important primary law. So it's going to save us a whole lot of steps when the time comes to actually look at the law. And sure enough, good old footnote number 7 here is referring us to 29 U.S.C.A. 1144A, so a section in the U.S. Code. Don't worry, we're going to be talking tons about the U.S. Code in a few weeks. So our secondary source here, our ALR, is providing us with that background, with the references. It's giving us some state-specific information, or rather circuit-specific information. So we definitely want to look at this in depth. Any questions about ALR? Okay, next group, number 2, AMDR. Who's going to? Westlaw or Lexis? Westlaw it is. I'll cue it up for you. Okay. So help Katrina out. What's she going to do?
I typed in American jurisprudence in the search. The first thing I did was I looked through all of these and I clicked on help, but I didn't think it was particularly helpful. I think it was mostly about like the government role.
So you browsed through our table of contents, another of my favorite resources, to see if you saw anything useful, but not yet.
I didn't feel it was very helpful.
Okay.
The first term we used was HMO liability.
Okay.
And again, it was mostly about regulations, so it wasn't terribly helpful for what you're looking for. But if you changed it to HMO denial or denial of coverage,
Get rid of liability or no?
yeah.
Okay.
There was a lot more information that came up.
Anything good?
There was stuff on notice, so if she was denied, what their process was, the appeals process. Or maybe if you just put in denial, HMO denial. Yeah, so notice,
This one.
reconsideration, if you were asking for reconsideration of the denial. If I scrolled through a little bit more, there was trial techniques for if you're going to trial based on denial, based on a pre-existing condition. So there was a lot in there. It was just kind of weeding through and finding the right term to get to.
So it sounds to me like there was a lot in there, the overall issue, but sort of ancillary considerations that you may want to get to later on, but it hasn't really
There wasn't
focused.
anything that was specifically like what their liability is and what you're looking, like what the specific terms are.
So would you say what you saw was better or what we saw in the ALR was better? Okay. So you might, in your research log, want to jot these down later on when I have to worry about actually suing. I might want to get to these.
Practice, like if we were actually going to move forward, things that we were going to have to look into or do.
Like we'd
in
have to
order
ask her if she
fully
got
agree with
notice.
us.
Okay, so right, you want to ask her if she got notice. So more of that gathering more facts that you might not have known to ask after the during the first interview. Any good research references?
Maybe we could check this one.
There are a couple articles that we want to come back to later, but that's just after we found out more information and discovery.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mean AMDR sections?
Yeah, like 20, 26, 45, and a few others.
Okay. Anything else to add?
That's all the most valuable thing that I found was the notice part. Because without notice, you can't really, I don't think you can really move forward, really. You have to find out what the insurance company did on their part to see if they followed, like, the correct procedure. So, I would just look at the notice part more to see if there was anything else. And there's a bunch of federal regulations here. So,
Okay. So there are.
yeah.
Okay.
So would you click on that? I don't know.
At the moment, no. We still have the very basic question. Can we sue? If we can, what are we suing for? What's the deal with this whole ERISA thing? Yes, we want to make sure absolutely that she got proper notice, but if she did, and it's very likely she did, these insurance companies don't want to make it too easy for people to sue. She still wants to sue. She was denied coverage. She was harmed. So even if she got notice, which means that that part isn't a basis, you still want to move forward. So if I may take over, thank you very much. So part of researching efficiently is knowing what paths to put off for later if necessary, and what paths you really want to go down immediately. And that's part of experience, is sort of always questioning and being mindful, if I can use some of the current lingo today. What do I really need to know right away? And what can I put off and what should I put off to later? Just knowing to ask yourself that question can be really useful. So I've asked about research references, and again, this was one of the screencast questions as well. And Katrina very astutely noticed we've got some federal regulations, and I'm actually very impressed that you knew they were federal regulations. A lot of people don't know what they are. So again, these secondary sources can give us references to primary sources. You notice here on the right, Westlaw sometimes gives us references to other secondary sources. And I failed to notice back here on, actually I'll do it this way, I'm going to go back in my history to our ALR article, I hope. There we go. Oh, I had it and it went away. There we go. So these secondary sources will not only give us all of these different navigation tools, references to primary sources, but they will sometimes give us references to other secondary sources. So here in that wonderful ALR article, there are references to AmJur. So we might find relevant entries to AmJur this way. Or CJS will get to your group, or treatises. So that's back to our bibliographic awareness theme of see what your resource is going to do for you. Okay. And the other part of bibliographic awareness, as I'm going to jump a little bit all over here, is back in AmJur. If we go directly there, so American jurisprudence. Another tool that Westlaw provides us, if you go directly to the title, as I just have done, is it gives us an index to the whole set. So Marianne very wisely looked at the table of contents. Table of contents are great, as I showed you in the screencast, but you can also look at indexes online. I personally am not that much of a fan of indexes online, but honestly, if it's a choice between looking at an index, if I really want to look at an index and I have to, I'll take a look at it online is the point. I find them make more sense to me in the books personally, but that could be a personal preference. But be aware that the indexes are available online. And if you really want to focus in on a particular term, you can do that. Okay. CJS group. Westlaw, you have to be Westlaw. So I'm going to just get you back. And if you could just dive in to show us what you did to find the best thing that you found.
Section 2141 and 145.
Okay, and how useful were they? Okay, so it talks about provided by ERISA. So if we do have to go the federal court route under ERISA, this might give us some guidance. I haven't read it yet, other than that first sentence, so I can't be sure that it will do that, but the first sentence sure sounds like it, so I'll read on before I conclude any further. Any resource references?
There are, they do cite a lot of cases here, which could be helpful to maybe any variation of, ERISA in which something else was brought up, and then maybe they allowed coverage not only just to prevent frivolous lawsuits, but maybe, also for other reasons, just allowing more protection to, the patient. So.
Okay.
I thought that was good.
So, again, a little possibly useful. I might jot
Mhm.
this down to look back to if I determine that ERISA does apply and we have to go that route. But would you say it's fair that CJS didn't really answer the fundamental question of
I don't think it did.
what's our theory? Do I have to worry about ERISA in the first place?
Yeah, I don't think it answered it. Definitely not up front, but even with like a little bit of research, I don't think enough to the point.
Okay. So far, how would you rank ALR, AMGER, and CJS? Let's get to the CJS group first.
I would say definitely ALR and then maybe CJS after, just because it does touch on some points, even though it's not like specifically this situation. I think that it still, you know, maybe gets into it a little bit more and you can expand on that.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much for your able driving. Okay. Proof of facts. Okay, also only on Westlaw.
So I guess we started with just searching proof of fact. So it didn't seem to be like option to click on the side.
Okay.
After that, then narrow it to just secondary sources. Right.
Okay, so you should have been able to, if you go back to Westlaw, the home page, when typing in proof of facts on top, it should pop up. Yeah, there you go. You can go directly there. So, and now you can search within proof of facts. So what was your
Search HMO liability would be a fun one.
short and to the point?
I also, in narrowing the terms, I put in medical necessity.
Okay, per our conversation, fair enough. So you're doing search within.
Yes.
Excellent. That search, everybody see where to get to search within? That's a great, efficient resource. Again, depending on your cost plan, search within won't, if you're being charged for searches, search within, you won't be charged for an additional search.
And there's some there. I also put an and put denied coverage as well.
The one thing you want to know about search within, and we'll go into more detail next week when we talk about advanced search techniques, when you do use search within, you must use Boolean searching. And I'll go into the Boolean connectors. Somebody asked about that in the screencast. I'll go into Boolean connectors in far more detail next week.
I'm not sure if it's coming up on that one, but I found first-party insurance coverage for medical necessary treatment.
What about the first one?
I didn't say I didn't use that exact search method, so I thought the first one might be good.
Yeah, I wonder who that was. So proof of facts, Amy, if you would scroll down a little bit, proof of facts is a kind of hybrid sort of publication. It's not really an encyclopedia, even though its name is American Jurisprudence Proof of Facts. It's kind of a specialized. We'll actually be looking at it in far more depth later in the semester when we talk about practice materials, because it pulls in lots of useful resources for when you get into the actual practice and possibly litigating phase. So if you would go back to results, because Alex, you found another one?
Yeah, I found it a different way, I guess.
Okay.
I don't know if it's coming up on here. What was it called again?
It's called first-party insurance coverage for medically necessary
Yeah.
treatment.
Oh, okay.
It gives like an overview of the factors, or I guess it's options. It's just on how to prove medical necessity. And then as far as it delineates claims against HMOs for
liability for the negligence of practitioners versus the negligence of the HMO and the denial of coverage. So, I mean, it seemed pretty comprehensive and had a lot of stuff.
That sounds like we have two possible useful proof of facts articles. And did you find any useful resource references?
I mean, there's plenty of federal cases as well as the state cases that I think are an example from several jurisdictions.
What about other secondary sources?
Yeah, it seemed like there's references to other proof of facts publications as well. It's mostly like case illustrations and goes to primary sources.
Okay. Any other observations about proof of facts? Okay, thank you. So one aspect that I promised to talk about, so I shall, is we already identified where our client is in New York. If we do bring a state court case, it's going to be in a New York court. If it's going to be a federal case, it's going to be a New York federal court. A lot of times people are tempted to narrow to their jurisdiction, right? Why search the entire U.S. when we're worried about New York? We need to, at some point, we're going to need to search New York law regardless of whether it's state or federal court because we need to know about New York law. However, I would say in the very beginning of your research, for a topic especially that you think is going to include federal as well as state issues, unless you really know, I just want New York law, I would say don't narrow your jurisdiction right away. And the reason, at least for secondary sources, and the reason for that is because you might miss out on some useful resources. So I'm taking our search HMO liability, and I'm going to narrow to secondary sources. My eyes can adjust. There they go. Because if you narrowed to New York, you would risk missing the ALR article that we decided is pretty good. You would risk missing the proof of facts articles and possibly CJS, but proof of facts that we found a couple of which look pretty good. But if you scroll down here, I mean, you have to go, so here's that proof of facts. It's number 3 on my very general HMO liability for everywhere. You don't want to risk, especially for secondary sources, you don't want to risk missing something useful. And I'll be with you in just a second and finish my thought. Now, obviously, that's not always going to be true. If you get a, what's the New York law on a little while ago I got a question, what's the New York law on whether there are whether New York State has any laws about minimum weights for models. I'm worried about these poor anorexic girls who get way too thin, and they want to know what the New York State law is. If that's the case, I'm probably going to go directly to New York. But on something where I'm not even sure what the issues are yet, like our HMO liability, I need to worry about medical necessity or pre-existing condition. ERISA is still a whole big black box that I know I have to figure out. I'm going to stay broader and not limit to jurisdiction. Question?
Limited to state and single state and federal, would national publications come up or not?
It seems hit or miss to me. I mean, I can try it now, and I honestly don't know what the answer will be. So if we do New York and all federal, and let's see what happens. I found it very hit or miss and not consistent, so that's why I prefer not to. Again, when I want to get the general publications like ALR, and it kind of depends on what the service classifies them as. And honestly, I don't want to have to remember what that is. Limited memory. So we're certainly getting very different results. So it looks like we're getting ALR, but I'm not seeing proof of facts. Okay, so other questions? Last but not least, New York juror. Now that is New York specific. New York juror is the New York equivalent of American jurisprudence. Anytime you see jurisprudence, that means it's an encyclopedia. There are a bunch of different states that have jurisprudences, like California, Florida, and don't ask me to list them all because I don't have them all memorized. But I would say New York juror, if I have a New York question, like that wait for models question, I'm going to New York. New York Juror would be my first stop. Anytime an attorney comes into the reference desk and says, I need to do research on the New York law for, first place I send him or her is New York Juror. So.
Yeah, so we went, again, like other groups, for growth in the first time, trying our HMO liability denial of coverage. First, this health maintenance organization came up, so figured that we could click on that. Similar to other groups, not great, but deals a lot with liability of the doctors, et cetera, med mal. But there was mention of ERISA in this, which we felt was relevant in that observation first sentence. State law causes of action against HMOs are preempted by ERISA, where blank, and then the preceding paragraph talks about carve-outs. So again, once we do our factual analysis, we'll theoretically be able to determine whether we fit into one of these New York carve-outs, or we can even get to it here state court. Then just play with the search of like HMO liability, HMO denial of coverage, and ultimately did what the second group did, which is went back to the table of contents and just started clicking under insurance and then subgroups, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
I guess it was one of the benefits was that everything was very succinct. It wasn't like maybe an AOR, which looked great, but it was pretty overwhelming. It was like, all right, if you found something, it was whatever, 15 sentences, and then boom, on to the next one. And yes, James is capably showing, we went to insurance, then under part 2, if you click the expansion, and you go all the way down, eventually it gets to group insurance and things like that. So again, it's more of, we found out about jurisdiction, about damages, about potential arbitration clauses that might be in our HMO, so that if we're going to sue them, but maybe we can't even go to court, we might have already signed an arbitration award, but nothing that fit perfectly and it was comprehensive of everything in one source.
So any other thoughts on New York Juror? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Any other thoughts? Okay, so a couple of wrap-up thoughts on encyclopedia since we're in New York Juror. I'm going to go back to that first section on health maintenance organization. And this is probably, from what I've looked around, the best section you'll find in New York Juror. It's not ideal in that it doesn't cover anything, but it gets you a piece of the puzzle. And that's another aspect you want to keep in mind. Very rarely will you find one-stop shopping where it just has everything you need and you're done, boom, gone. As I mentioned last time, unfortunately for us, research isn't a nice step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sometimes you start in step 5, sometimes you start at step 8. And sometimes it's a little bit of a detective puzzle. That's one reason I happen to like it, because I always loved detective stories when I was a kid, and the Sherlock Holmes putting together all the little pieces. And that's kind of what research is. So you have a little piece here. It's not ideal, but it talks about member, employee, or agent of the organization or plan may be fully and personally liable. So there's another option there if someone in the HMO did something negligent or otherwise bad, and accountable for negligent or wrongful act or misconduct. So again, a little possibility. We don't know that yet, but again, more facts we may have to gather in discovery to see, how did they make the decision? Was that person negligent? So again, developing the different theories, because ultimately what we want to do is get money for our client, right? And if we get money for our client because someone was negligent at the HMO versus they decided it was not medically necessary when it was, we want to have all of the possibilities. So glean out those possibilities, and again, follow the footnotes for the references. Another aspect I want to point out, actually, I'm going to go over to Lexis just so we can see the other guys, because we've been focusing on Westlaw, and I'm going to go to Amger. So proof of facts and CJS are not on Lexis because they're West publications, but Amger is on both. So I'm actually going to enter our search terms without a typo, preferably. So it's really great to see you all utilizing the table of contents by going to the table of contents and browsing. I think the table of contents is one of the most useful research resources there are. So here is another way of using the table of contents that I actually find sometimes more effective because it gets me further along the road without me having to look through the whole list, and that is to do a search. And then I see something that maybe looks close, maybe not. As we saw, Amger really wasn't great for our topic. But if I take a look, and what I can do is I take a look at the heading, and you can do this on Westlaw too. So, okay, physicians, surgeons, other healers, not sure. Duty of care, liability for malpractice. Well, we're not interested in physician malpractice. We've already determined that. Liability of third parties for physician's negligence. We're not really in that. So let's take a look at duty of care. And so what we find here is liability, vicarious liability, standard of care, malpractice actions. So we might find something useful by looking at a section that may or may not be ideal, and then looking at that heading and going into the table of contents. I'm going to show you an example of this when we look at treatises later on, where we actually do find something useful. But here's an example. That would be one of the things I would make sure to do. I might look at standard of care, because if we're going to try to hold somebody negligent, we want to know what the standard of care is, right? Don't know that it's going to be useful. Any questions? So that's encyclopedias. So we now have a slightly better sense of what we're looking for. We know we still have to investigate ERISA. And again, there's no set order in which to check secondary sources. I suggest encyclopedias are a good place to start. You may want to, actually Google is probably a good place to start because it's free. You may want to start on Google and not only look at articles, but look at news. So for instance, and I'm going to see if I have this. So I'm going to go away from our example for a moment if you are dealing with an issue that's currently in the news. So I honestly don't think this works for our clients' issues, so I make my best guess I probably would try it. I don't think they're talking about HMO liability in the general interest newspapers these days, or any newspapers these days. But if my topic was in the news, and example here, we've all been hearing about the latest tax overhaul legislation, and of course, those of us in New York who are paying taxes are very interested and maybe a little disturbed about the state and local tax deduction going away. If that were my issue and that's what I needed to research, I would, of course, throw that into Google, and I would be looking not only for articles from organizations, but I'd just be looking at regular news articles. So let's actually go back to all results. And what we would see are articles from all over the place. CNN.com is an organization, but the Wall Street Journal, and I would probably limit that to reputable, what I know of as reputable newspapers, because the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, I think there's a Forbes article in here, Washington Examiner. they're going to give me at least some background on what the issues are. Especially if I don't know anything about state and local tax deduction, that would be a really good place to start because it's written for general interest. So it'll at least get me started, again, with that terminology. Another aspect of the news I would also look at are legal news. Sure. And let's just open. So there are a lot of legal newspapers. Typically, a state will have one leading legal newspaper. Here in New York, it's the New York Law Journal. Who was it who was going to Louisiana? Alex? Okay, I don't know what the Louisiana was, but I'm sure if you know Louisiana attorneys, they'll tell you which newspaper to follow. For those of you staying in New York, you want to be looking at the New York Law Journal regularly, whether it's on Lexis, whether it's at the New York Law Journal website. And we now know possibly the easiest way to find it is just to plug it in there. And I'm going to Lexis because it's not on Westlaw. The New York Law Journal is part of the American Lawyer Media. You may have heard of American Lawyer, the magazine. Anybody hear of American Lawyer? Yeah. Okay, don't worry about it if you haven't. ALM publishes many of the legal newspapers across the country. So they may also publish the one from Louisiana. I know they publish the one from Connecticut and New Jersey, and they're all just on Lexis. Lexis has an exclusive arrangement with them. So you may want to take a look at the New York Law Journal. So if we want to investigate, let's say, all right, let's see what's going on with this whole ERISA thing. I talked about being preempted, so actually let's go with ERISA preemption. Again, you can truncate. We'll talk more about that next time. So what tends to happen in newspapers, whether it's the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, or the New York Law Journal, is there tend to be a lot of articles when something major has happened. So that's why we look for current news items like the state and local tax deduction. That's current, so that's one reason to look there. ERISA preemption, not so current, so we're seeing stuff from 1997. Again, we want to be aware of our dates. And I might take a look at that again because it may be relevant. But I'm going to look through just to see if there's something a little more current, and 2012 isn't so bad. So I could get some background about what this whole ERISA preemption thing is. Honestly, the way I would be getting background on the whole ERISA preemption thing is reading that ALR article. That went into depth about it. I know I didn't give you a chance to do that, but that's where you would learn what it is you have to start worrying about. Okay, so that's legal news, worthwhile. The problem, the challenge with legal news is that if you do just a regular secondary source search, legal news isn't listed in secondary sources. You would need to go to the legal news section. So you'll see legal news is separate from secondary materials. So here's a tip, and maybe this is after your Google search, and this is also a Google search, I would look for this next. Especially for an area where you don't know a lot about it. And I will also say, if you're doing research papers, not only legal research for clients, but research papers, this is I find a really useful tip. So we're still working out this whole ERISA thing. So ERISA law research. And again, I'm doing just a plain old Google search. But what that will do for me is bring up research guides. So you see here, you can kind of see by the web address, guides.libraries. We librarians, don't ask me why, because actually I really don't. But a lot of librarians love to sit down and make research guides on different topics. And you'll find those guides on libraries' websites. And actually I'll be showing you ours in just a couple of minutes. So here's these wonderful librarians who love to make these research guides, making the guides on ERISA. So here's someone who's figured out the research on ERISA for me. I don't have to do it. So I could go to this one at uc.edu, or I guess it's University of California, and find different research references that I can then follow up on Lexis Westlaw in the library to get information, to get some background on ERISA, because that's the search I did. And in addition to libraries, it also gives us sometimes government or other organization research guides, which are good too. It doesn't have to be by a librarian by any means. And actually, I'm not sure if we saw this last time or not, but here's one. We know it's government because it's dol.gov, and even if you don't know what DOL stands for, you can guess the .gov, but probably now see it's Department of Labor. And so here's a research guide from the Department of Labor. This has a couple of reasons why you want to be very aware of these. One, it's a good research guide for the same reasons I just said, but also because it's the Department of Labor, they may be giving you guidance about how the Department of Labor administers this particular aspect of the law. Now, it's not a case, it's not a statute, it's not a regulation, it's just guidance, which means it's just secondary material. But if the Department of Labor is telling you this is a good way to do it, I kind of want to know about that and probably go along, especially if it's going to help my client. And we'll talk more about administrative materials and agency materials when we talk about administrative law, but this also falls under secondary. So here we have a research guide. And the other thing is when I do find a site that I think, oh, this Department of Labor, since we're talking about ERISA, which is health plans that I get through my employment, let me see what else they have to say. So this is that advanced Google trick I told you about last time, where I used the word site, S-I-T-E, before my website. I deleted the web address up to the very beginning, so just after the .gov, the first part, and then I can use my research terms. So for instance, let's try HMO denial. Not sure I'm finding anything useful, but again, that Google site search is a really great tool to know about for legal research and for any kind of research if you want to search a particular site. Okay, just really quick because I'm a little bit behind here. And one of you actually asked about this. Ooh, I'm getting ahead of myself there, sorry. Blogs. I don't know that I would do this most of the time, much of the time, but I might want to see if there are any blogs out there to help me out. So again, I might try ERISA Law blogs. And you're all familiar with blogs, right? I'm sure you read a few regularly. Yes? No? People not into blogs? This side of the room? Okay. As I said, this isn't something I would make an effort to do every single time, but if for some reason it comes to my attention, ooh, a blog might be useful, this is one way to do it. The ABA has a list of topics for you on blogs. So actually, here's the benefits. If you find it here. Last but not, a couple of useful blogs I'm going to point out for you for your own research. For those of you interested in the law school world, even though it says Tax Prof blog, this author writes about all sorts of law school stuff. He's really interesting to follow. I showed you the ABA site. There's also something called Law Prof blog. So again, a whole bunch of different areas. And the one thing I forgot to mention in talking about research guides, if you're Googling research guides, I'm suggesting it for our ERISA law research, but if you're doing a paper topic, I would strongly recommend whatever your paper topic is, law research, and see if you can find a research guide for your paper topic. Okay, so there's one other area of what we call current awareness. What I'm talking about now are current awareness, things to tell you what's going on these days. So newspapers, blogs, and here we have Bloomberg Law. We're finally getting to Bloomberg Law. And one area that Bloomberg has that nobody else does are called these BNA law reports. Bloomberg is actually technically known as Bloomberg BNA because Bloomberg bought BNA, and they bought BNA because BNA has these current awareness newsletters. Back in the old days, they came out in paper every week. They don't anymore. They're now online, and you can get them a couple of ways. I suggest going through Bloomberg because we have access to Bloomberg, and you can narrow down by topic. For our client, it might be healthcare, it might be employee benefits, it might be labor and employment. So rather than guess, I would probably just do a search for HMO liability, ERISA preemption, whatever aspect of our topic. And the thing to remember about Bloomberg, if you do have access wherever you go, is that once your organization subscribes, it's an all-you-can-eat database. You don't have to worry about costs and efficiency. I mean, you want to be efficient with your time, but you don't have to worry about costs and whether you can do an extra search and all the things we're talking about with Lexis and Westlaw. You can search as much as you want for as long as you want, and it doesn't cost anybody anything extra. And just to show you what a BNA law report looks like, you can see pretty much just, this is from the Pension and Benefits Reporter, which is actually where a lot of ERISA and health insurance stuff is covered for BNA. So scrolling down a little bit, we see ERISA mentioned. And here's a little bit of discussion of ERISA. This probably isn't the best resource you'll find for what we've seen so far. I don't know about you, but I still think ALR, proof of facts, CJS a little bit, AMJUR for later on. But it is there. Okay, any questions about BNA? Or anything else so far? Okay, so let's dive in and do our first workshop, and then I promise we will take a break. Yeah, Alex.
I don't know if you already covered this, but what happens when there's a time crunch involved? I mean, there's maybe a motion you need to file and do research. I mean, in the morning before lunch. What's the best, I guess, a quick way to look at secondary sources, not to miss anything, but still be able to look at case law as soon as possible?
So you're not going to want to do everything, obviously, because you're under a time crunch. I still would see what Google has to say first, but I wouldn't be spending a half an hour on Google. I'd spend a half an hour on Google even if I did have a lot of time. But I would see what Google has to say first. See if there's a research guide. Again, whatever law research. And then again, depending, you need to know what your plan is, whether it's Lexis or Westlaw. Honestly, if I'm under a time crunch, I'm not going to go to case law first unless someone's telling me you need to find cases on. If I need to find the law on, I might not even know if it's governed by statute or not. So I don't want to dive right into cases if it's governed by statutes. The cases may refer me for the statute, but that's not really the most efficient way to find a relevant statute. A lot of times I know in real estate law, because you have a sense of the parameters and it's less governed by statutes and more case law, then I might go straight to case law. So once again, I'm giving you the classic law school answer, it depends. But just to give you a sense, again, I would start with Google. It's free. Don't spend a lot of time. Try it, and that's really where you want to be mindful and think about, okay, what's the issue I really got to worry about, and what are these tangential issues that maybe I'll get to if I have time, but I really got to answer this major question first. So, as I said, I'd go to Google, depending on what my plan is on Lexis and Westlaw. Again, depending on what the issue is on Lexis and Westlaw, again, I would go to secondary sources because they will sometimes give me the answer a whole lot quicker than if I'm messing around in case law for an hour or two. I would look at ALR. And ALR would be one of those, either I find something really quick or I give up. Because if I find something really quick, I found something good. I probably would go to treatises after that. ALR isn't doing me any good. The encyclopedias are good to give you background, but if I'm really on a crunch, I'm usually going to want something more in-depth. answer your question. With the classic, it depends. I mean, we are in law school.
Perfectly accurate.
Any other questions? Okay, so first workshop on the current awareness. So pass this around. While that's going around, so I'm asking you to pretty much do what we have just been doing, except I'm asking you to choose a topic of interest to you. So if you're writing a paper, you might want to use that. That's certainly fine by me. So I'm going to ask you to first go to New York Law Journal on Lexis, or try the legal news category. And one thing as the paper's going around that I haven't discussed too much, but actually this is a good opportunity because it was a question in the screencast, is how do you find a broader topic? So for instance, you may want to look at, if your topic were juvenile delinquency, maybe you're finding something, maybe you're not. But a broader topic might be criminal law. A broader topic might be family law. The way I think about trying to find broader topics sometimes is kind of a funky way of, what law school class would it be taught in? We've all been in law school for 2 or 3 years now, so you kind of have a sense of what the classes are and what the subjects are. So that's how I might think about what the broader topic might be. Ask me to find a research guide. And then going to Bloomberg and looking at those law reports. And then if you have time, which we probably won't, because as I said, I'm a little bit behind taking a look at a block. I'll be walking around, so if you have any problems getting to a particular spot or any other question, I'll come around or raise your arm and I'll get right to you. Or shout out. I'm going to pause our recording, but not completely yet. See if we can fit in everything. Okay, so we've talked about encyclopedias. We have talked about current awareness and research guides. Let's dive into treatises. You saw the second screencast. And again, treatises are going to be much more in-depth. So again, depending on your issue, depending on your time frame, treatises might actually be the place to go if you don't have a lot of time, because it might have everything together at once. So as we've been discussing, and it seems like the theme for today is it depends on your issue as to what's going to work best. Okay, so from what you remember from the screencast, how do we find treatises? Katrina. The catalog? Ah, excellent. The catalog. Okay. The catalog's definitely a way. Any other ways? Lexis-Westlaw. Filter by treatise. Yeah. Lexis-Westlaw. Bloomberg. Other thoughts?
You do state and practice area. You can also filter, like, once you get to the secondary sources, I don't know, I found this helpful. If you know your practice area, whatever, you're doing healthcare law, you can like just start in the world of healthcare law.
Absolutely. So there are any number of ways to filter on both Lexis and Westlaw. So I'm showing you on Lexis because that's the screen that's up, by practice area or by state. You're forgetting one near and dear to my heart. Alicia? Yes, thank you. Oh, good. Ask your favorite reference librarian. And actually, this was a question on the screencast, which I was pleased to see. Yes, as graduates, you are welcome to come back to the Hofstra Law Library anytime and use the resources here. You are welcome to give us a call if you need help. We would be happy to help you. You will, unfortunately, no longer have access to Lexis and Westlaw after about 6 months. And watch for emails regarding how that works, because you, as graduates, you have access for a certain amount of time after you graduate, and depending on the service, whether it's Lexis or Westlaw or Bloomberg, that time frame can be different. You also will not have access to to some of our remotely to some of our databases. I'm going to be showing some of them to you now. Well, you still have access, but you can come and use those databases when you graduate. We do have availability for Westlaw that you can come and use after you graduate, but not for Lexis. Okay, so let's take a closer look at some of the ways we talked about briefly. And then we'll have another workshop to find treatises, and I'll go into more detail. So here on Lexis, we talked about one, going into the practice area. Another way we can find materials on Lexis back here on the main screen, or you could do it on the other screen too, is I kind of call it the I'm hoping I'm lucky way of looking for treatises. I just type in the word that I want to appear in the title, even if I don't know that there's a title with that word. So we know we're worried about ERISA. So sure enough, what Lexis and Westlaw will do for us is it'll pull up some of the sources with the word ERISA. So litigation report, advisory council reports, ERISA law and beyond. So I could just find a treatise that way. We talked about browsing, and of course we can do a search. So we go for our now favorite search, HMO liability. And as we've already talked about, narrow to secondary materials, as we've been doing. And then we can narrow to treatises. And one aspect of using treatises that I mentioned in the screencast, if we find a useful section, so personal injury, action, defense, damages, and it talks about managed healthcare organizations, we now know that is relevant to us. Now, of course, this section is action based on quality of care, vicarious liability. I'm not sure which that covers, so let's take a look. Because we know we're not really interested in vicarious liability, but we might be interested in an action based on quality of care. So it talks about respondeat superior, and no, that's vicarious, we're not interested in. But this is the technique I showed you a little bit in the screencast that I talked about with regard to AMJUR, and this honestly is one of the most useful techniques for using any type of resource that's organized by subject. Again, we're talking about bibliographic awareness, and what does our resource do for us? So a resource that's organized chronologically, like a law review, so it's organized by year and by issue. One article that follows another article may have nothing to do with one another. So this doesn't work for law reviews. But for treatises that are organized by subject because they're on a particular subject, for an encyclopedia that's organized by subject, each different title is its own subject, this works rather well. So here we have personal injury, action defenses, that's the name of our treatise, and we have a whole chapter on managed care health organizations. So this section that I clicked on may or may not be useful. We're not really interested in vicarious liability, but if I click on the chapter from which it comes, and I take a look, so we can learn a little bit about the managed healthcare industry. It seems like we need to know a little bit about their decision-making, notice, so that may help us out. Direct liability. There we go. We were looking at 9403, which is vicarious. Not useful, but direct liability might be great. And there are actually subsections here we might want to look at. Corporate negligence. So we're talking a little bit. Maybe negligence will help us out. We maybe have to go into discovery to see if that's relevant. So some of these other, oh look, here's a whole section based on denial of treatment. Again, the section we first found wasn't that great, but these sections I think look pretty fantastic. Reform statutes, I don't know. Interference, not so much. Fiduciary duty, something we haven't talked or thought about yet. Is there any kind of fiduciary duty going on here? I don't know. I can read about it. Maybe there is. Maybe that's another avenue I can pursue for our client, or you can pursue for our client. Defenses based on preemption claim. Oh, here's that preemption again. All right, we're really going to have to find out about that. Need to click on it, but why not? Statutory, so we can read all about ERISA. Even though we don't want that defense, that's actually totally opposite of what we want for our client. We better know about it because that's certainly what the insurance company is going to be using if it is relevant, which it's beginning to sound like it is. So let's go back where we were. You get the idea. I don't have to go through the whole list, I think, to see what else might be useful here. The point being is that looking at any particular section, even if that section isn't great but maybe somewhat relevant, take a look at the heading above and look at the table of contents. See what else you find that might be useful. Here's an example where the actual section Lexis brought up wasn't great, but the other ones look pretty promising and likely to help us out a whole lot. Okay, other aspect that you want to keep in mind when looking at treatises, especially on Lexis and Westlaw and Bloomberg online, basically, again, is that bibliographic awareness. How up to date is it? Sometimes treatises go online and they never get updated because the author never updates it. Or maybe the author decided they had the first older edition on Lexis and maybe they decide Westlaw is going to pay them more, so they put the newer edition on Westlaw. I'm not saying you look for that. I don't know that that's ever happened, in fact, but you want to know how up to date it is. So on Lexis, to do that, you can do it a couple of ways. If you see this I link up here for whatever treatise that you've looked at. So publication information through February 2018. That's impressive. They're looking into the future. I don't know quite how they do that. I think they post-date what's called the release. And you'll see this is release number 175, and it's probably just come out or coming out any day now. So you have a treatise with a crystal ball. Other places to find that, if for whatever reason the I link doesn't appear, if you go to the table of contents and under publication information or what's new, you'll see a publication update. Sometimes you may have to go to publication information and go to the copyright date. Depends on the treatise. Every treatise is somewhat different, depends on the original publisher. But important to know. So even though, no, we don't believe they're looking into the future, we do know it's pretty up to date, quite up to date. Okay. Kind of the same deal on Westlaw, but let's take a quick look. Nonetheless, so again, you can browse to secondary. We can go to practice areas, go to secondary sources, and browse by topic area or by jurisdiction. You see the topics here. We can also, as we did, go ahead and put in our search. Narrow that way, and again you can do this filtering at any point either before or after, pre-search or post-search filters. Those are the general terms used for what I'm talking about. And if I want to filter by publication type, sometimes I have to let it know I want to see more of them, and sure enough I do want to filter by texts and treatises. And with Westlaw I always have to remember to apply filters, which I sometimes forget. And again, you asked me questions about whether Westlaw is going to include any particular type of resource in any particular filter or search, and it kind of depends on how Westlaw defines things. So Westlaw defines proof of facts as a text or treatise, so we see it again here, which is fine. I wouldn't myself call it a treatise. And that brings up an interesting question, because a lot of students ask me, how do I know if it's a treatise or not? I wouldn't get too worried about it. If you are answering a question and you see something in Texts and Treatises and it's proof of facts, if it's useful, then that's a good thing. And that's the bottom line. Is it useful? For purposes, when I'm asking you if it's a treatise, I tend to define treatises as an in-depth work by an expert. Usually has a title, sometimes has an author, not always. So here we have, for instance, American Jurors' Proof of Facts. It's not on a particular topic. So, as I said, my personal definition, that's not a treatise. Again, don't worry too much about it. The bottom line is it useful? And for our purposes, even though I have my definition, I'm going to be pretty flexible about what you look at, because I know the services have crazy definitions. So in my definition, HR series, compensation, and benefits, that's a pretty specific topic. Again, vicarious liability, we know not what we want. But the same strategy applies. So first, to make sure how up-to-date we are, so this particular treatise is a little more honest, and January 2018 is a little more realistic. Anyway, I shouldn't say honest, but a little more realistic. But taking a look at the table of contents. So you can't really click on the heading here on Westlaw the way we did on Lexis, but you can look here to the right for the table of contents. So we see here liability for managed care provider malpractice. So, hadn't really thought about calling it malpractice for a managed care provider, but and we see the various sections. So here's again direct liability, vicarious liability, section 5744. We know we don't want, but we might want to take a look at direct liability. Or if we look at the overall heading for managed care, healthcare liability issues, and see what other aspects might be of interest. So negligent management of care, there's that negligence coming in. So beginning to think, all right, I need to investigate this. Again, it might involve discovery in terms of what actually happened. If we can show negligence, we want to certainly learn about general principles. Haven't really thought about liability under the ADA. I have no idea if that's relevant, but ERISA defense, there's that ERISA defense. Probably need to be looking at that. And that's pretty much going down. So, and other legal issues. So I might even go one more step up and see other legal issues and see if there's anything. Cost containment and quality review. We're talking about if indeed our HMO denied it because of cost issues. Maybe we want to look at that. So again, our particular term search brought up not the greatest section again on vicarious liability, but looking at the table of contents on it, because it was close but not quite, looking at the table of contents got us two sections that look like they will be really helpful. So that table of contents, totally useful. Okay. And last but arguably least, I probably shouldn't say that, especially when recorded, Bloomberg has a little less of a breadth of selection of treatises. And the best way on Bloomberg to get there, a couple of ways. You could go here to books and treatises. I actually like this select sources better because it gives some more options. So looking here, if I use the little tab here to drill down, I can select a variety of different types of treatises. So maybe I want to search those law reports which aren't treatises, but maybe I want to throw that in there. I Certainly books and treatises make sense, but Bloomberg, it also has manuals. Well, manuals are like something to tell you how to do things, right? So maybe a manual can tell me how to do some of this, so I might want to look at that. We haven't talked about portfolios yet. Maybe I check it, maybe I don't. And then I can put in my keywords up top and then search. And so we get a list of books and treatises here on Bloomberg, and sure enough, ERISA litigation. That actually sounds pretty useful, so I shouldn't have disrespected Bloomberg quite so quickly. Managed care litigation, so a couple of different possibilities. Fiduciary law, again, we don't know if that's relevant or not, but maybe worth investigating for our client. Some practice guides and these manuals. Benefits guide basics. Maybe we need to learn a little bit about how this whole benefits process works to figure out what we might want to pursue in discovery or other theories of holding our HMO accountable and getting damages for our client. Okay, and I mentioned that there are other databases out there. So different organizations subscribe to different databases. As I mentioned last class, some of you will be in Lexis shops, some of you will be in Westlaw shops, so one reason to get familiar with both of those. There may be a few that only have Bloomberg, although I kind of doubt that. If they only have Bloomberg, they might have Bloomberg and another. But some organizations, especially if they specialize in a particular topic area of law, might get a specific topical database that aren't Lexis and Westlaw. So here, in the Hofstra Law Library, we have a few of them. One of them is CCH IntelliConnect. It's not really, it's topic specific, but it covers several different topics. And what it's doing is it is asking me to authenticate remotely. So I'm putting in my network credentials and trying to do that while I talk. And you'll see CCH. So this is a database that you have access to now. Once you graduate, you can come back and use it if you're here in the library, but you will not be able to authenticate remotely as I just did. And you can see a variety of different topics. It focuses more on business and administrative type topics, tax, mergers, labor. Another database that I sent around a handout for you is called FastCase. FastCase is an interesting alternative to Lexis and Westlaw. It's basically a low-cost alternative. I've been telling you how expensive they are. Well, FastCase has not discovered, but realized there are a lot of attorneys out there, solo practitioners in small 2 or 3-person firms or mid-sized firms that can't afford thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that Lexis and Westlaw cost. So they have found a niche market, as they say. And the reason, and there are a few of these databases like FastCase, the reason I'm highlighting FastCase for you is that for the majority of you who are staying in New York, the New York Bar Association, if you join as a member, it's a volunteer organization. You don't automatically become a member if you pass the bar. You have to join the organization. But if you do join the organization, it gives you access to the New York portion of FastCase. The other thing I wanted to let you know, as students, you can join the New York State Bar Association now for free. And that's what that handout is mostly about. You don't have to do it for this class. You don't have to do it for any particular reason that I know of, but if you are interested, hey, it's free. Why not? So actually, I should have pointed out to you what I did here. So here on the Law Library homepage, you all know how to get here. on this Find Research Guides and Online Sources, I went to Fastcase. I typed in Fastcase and did search. And then here on the, I'm going to click on the link. I'm not going to click on the name. That's just this database is designed in an odd sort of way. I'm going to click on the link there. It's going to bring me to Fastcase. We'll be looking at Fastcase in far more depth when we talk about cases, but I wanted to first introduce the fact that you can be members of the New York Bar Association for free and have access to Fastcase that way. And while you're still a student here, also here, just doing what I just did in terms of searching Fastcase, and you'll see there's access to secondary sources. There are these treatises that you can access. There are also CLE books. CLE stands for Continuing Legal Education. That is something that you all are going to have to do once you become attorneys in New York to stay licensed as attorneys in New York. And you'll have to fulfill credits every, I think it's 1 or 3 years. I actually don't know the details. I don't know about Louisiana, but my guess is most states have it. They don't?
We don't have a lot of requirements.
Okay, something to be said for that, I guess. But for those here in New York, here are some New York treatises, again available through Fastcase. Okay. Other ways to find treatises. How many of you know about Google Books? Yay for Google Books. And you get to Google Books by Googling Google Books. So as you can see, Google Books is actually a separate portion of Google. So doing a regular Google search will not necessarily pull up what's in Google Books. You have to Google Google Books and then do whatever search you want to do.
It's an umbrella under Google Play, right? And then you can access Google Books through Google Scholar.
It's also in the little box in the top corner there.
The grid here?
Yeah, so you click on there and then more.
Yep, there are lots of different ways. Lots of different ways to get there. But you do want to be aware just a regular Google search will not give you these results. So you need to affirmatively get there another way. Now, Google is great. The downside to Google Books is you may not get access to the full text of the full book for copyright reasons. So definitely worth trying. It takes a minute or two and put in whatever your search terms, HMO liability, I tried health plan liability, and you can see some useful books through Google Books, and obviously you get access what you get access to. But it may give you a heads up in terms of worthwhile titles to investigate elsewhere if you can't get access to it in Google Books. Okay, so let's finish up by talking about how to effectively use treatises, find and use treatises, I should say. So it showed you I think the most important aspect using the table of contents, but let's take a look at print treatises, because as much as we're finding online through Google Books, Lexis Westlaw, these other databases, treatises are the one area where you still very possibly will have to use the good old-fashioned print. Don't think we're going to have time to do the print workshop today, but I will leave time for in next class. But let's look at how we go about finding and using those print treatises. And believe it or not, ironically enough, I'm going to do it online, and you'll see how in a moment. So Katrina reminded us about finding treatises using the library catalog. So again, here actually I'll go back to the home page to show you how I got there. So the library catalog is available. We have a shortcut box here on the Hofstra home page. So if we wanted to see what Hofstra has with regard to healthcare law, and again, I'm using my strategy. I'm not searching for a treatise specific on HMO liability. I could, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but I'm guessing a treatise, and especially in a catalog search, I'm not searching the full text when I search a catalog. When you search Lexis and Westlaw for treatises, you are searching the full text. But in a catalog, I'm searching basically the basic information about a book. So I'm going to choose a broader topic. So I'm going to maybe I were worrying about health plan liability, I might learn about this in an employment law class. I might learn about this in a health law class. So I'm going to try healthcare law. And again, there's nothing wrong with trying the more specific, but don't give up. And if you don't find the specific, try getting a little bit broader. So in healthcare law, I see this title, Contemporary Issue in Healthcare Law and Ethics. And I'm going to go here because it's an ebook. And that's essentially how we're going to investigate a print book online, because the ebook is essentially the print book on the screen. I should mention too that the Hofstra Law Catalog is basically tells you what we have access to in the library, both online and in print. So I'm going to the ebook now. You'll see some titles for Lexis and Westlaw actually in the catalog too, because we have access to those titles. One of you asked about the difference between WorldCat and Lexicat. Lexicat tells us what's here at Hofstra. WorldCat will tell you what's in a lot of different libraries. So again, it depends on what I need. If I need something that I have access to here and now, I'm going to look at Lexicat. If I want to just find out what's out there that I may have to figure out a way of getting, either through interlibrary loan or another way, I would go to WorldCat. WorldCat, I don't think you would use all that often representing a client. WorldCat is more useful for scholarly research. So here's our Contemporary Issues in Healthcare Law, our ebook, and our access is limited to Hofstra users. Let's hope we get there. Okay, so here we see a PDF. So this brings us to, so first thing I want to do is be bibliographically aware. So 2008, a little old, but again, just because it's old doesn't mean it isn't useful. It just means I have to make sure that I update any information or references that I'm going to rely on. There are actually newer treatises through the catalog, but when I look through them, I realized this one actually had the most useful information. So that's why I'm showing it to you. So we already talked about looking through the table of contents, and you can do that in print just like you do it online. Actually, I kind of think it's easier in print. And if we were flipping through this book, we would flip through and we'd see this broad table of contents, and yeah, I could browse that and guess maybe this parts 3 or 4, which are probably a little hard for you to read. Make that a little bigger. I don't know if that helps any. So part 3 is patient care issues. Part 4 is legal and ethical issues in health insurance and managed care. So I could browse through that. What I can also do, because some treatises have detailed tables of contents, and I could browse that way. Now, some ebooks have the ability to search, keyword search, so that's kind of like Lexis and Westlaw. But if you're truly in the print world, obviously you can't keyword search, which admittedly is a downside. So browsing the table of contents is one solution. Another solution is that index that we talked a little bit about and that you saw a little bit about on the screencast. An index is usually at the end of a treatise. If a treatise is multi-volumes, it's typically the last volume, but it might not be, so you have to be a little flexible. Some treatises put it in the first volume for reasons I don't really know, but that's how they do it. And as you saw on the screencast, you basically, index searching is kind of like keyword searching. You have to figure out what words to look under. So we might look under HMO. And depends on your functionality here on the ebook, whether page down works or not. Or I can actually scroll here. And you play around. Each ebook is going to be different. And I wouldn't worry too much about using ebooks. I mean, they're great. My purpose for this, again, is to show you how to use a print book that you don't have keyword search capability. So getting to the H portion, however you get there to look at HMO, or Health Maintenance Organization. So again, we're going to want to take a look at, let's see, excuse me, so ERISA immunity, definitely want to go to page 197, 198. External reviews, maybe. What else here? State regulation, not really worried about vicarious liability. Possible that we also want to look under managed care, because again, you need to be flexible with your terms. We saw an entry from HMO, but not every index will use that. So managed care, oh look, cost containment issues, 325. So jot down these references, ERISA 315. So again, on the book, I would just flip the pages back, which actually I find kind of easier, but we can virtually flip by typing in the page number and seeing what we find. So malpractice in context of cost containment and managed care. That sounds pretty useful, right? So again, just as we did on the online treatises, I'd want to see, it's a little bit difficult again with the scrolling, but I'd want to see where my section or page came in the context of the table of contents. So I know I was interested in page 196 and 311. So I might go back to the table of contents and just see where those pages fall in the contents and looked in those areas. It takes a while to scroll. See, turning pages can be easier. So there's our page 196. Let's see what heading it's under. So patient care issues, the law of tort liability. Imposing negligence liability on the institution or organization. That's something we might want to look at. And again, that's back a few pages. And again, whether you do this in a print book by going back to the table of contents or just flipping the pages back, again, be aware of the possibility of finding other useful things when you get a single page reference from an index. And then I might just, as I said, scroll through, as we were doing before, scroll through the table of contents. Some of this is going to be relevant, some not so much. Financial incentives to provide less care. Is that what happened to our controlling utilization of healthcare services? So this utilization review, we ran into that term earlier. This would be a place to investigate. And it's utilization also talking about ERISA. Again, so ways of finding relevant material. If you're in print, using the index, using the table of contents, flipping the pages. Okay. So we have a few more minutes. I know I'm quite a bit behind, but that's okay. We'll catch up next time. So what I'm going to ask you to do is start the workshop. Because the workshop will start with you identifying a treatise. We won't have time to go down into the library to find it, but you can identify it now, and then we'll have a head start for next time. So we're going to pass this around, and while I'm passing this around, what I'm asking you to do to identify a useful treatise, and I'm asking you to identify a useful treatise in print, because that's part of the workshop, you are going to go to a research guide. Remember, we were looking for research guides, but one that we actually have done here at Hofstra. So again, I'm going back to the library homepage, and you'll need to do this on your laptops. And instead of going to the catalog, I'm going to go to library guides. And here you see a list of those guides. We librarians here at Hofstra, even though I'm not a big fan of them, I've done them. We prepare research guides also, and you can see some of the topics. And one of the topics you will see are recommended legal treatises. So for your topic, same one if possible that you used for the first workshop. See if you can find a topic close to yours. Now again, you will most likely have to get much broader. So for instance, Alicia, what would you guess domestic violence would fall under in these topics? I'm putting you on the spot there, so. Perfect. Family law. Housing, animal, you might want to go to constitutional law. Housing, let's see. Housing, you might want to just try litigation. Property, actually housing would probably be most. Torts is always a good guess. You're not going to find anything. Some of you will find really good ones, some of you won't. Do your best to find something. And if it's not great, that's okay too. Again, the purpose of this exercise, when we get to do it next week, is for us to go down into the library, for you to get hands-on books and a little bit of experience using the print. Because again, some organizations are only going to have print, or they're going to tell you you can't use Lexis and Westlaw because it's too expensive. So you may have to come to a library to use print, if that's all that's available.
It has to be in print also, right?
It has to be in print also. Yeah, there's some that are Lexis and Westlaw. If it's Lexis, Westlaw, or print, then that's fine too, because we have the print. If you need help finding a broader topic, ask for help.